There's a certain kind of man who follows the rules without ever realizing he didn't write them. He wakes up early, replies to messages within the hour, holds the door, laughs politely when someone interrupts. He blends in, keeps it smooth, professional, dependable. People say he's grounded, a real one. But inside, there's a storm that never gets named. He's not free. He's functioning. And the worst part is, it's working. He gets approval, gets promoted, gets told he's easy to be around. But what he never gets is space, or truth, or rest. No one ever told him what it costs to be the man who makes other people comfortable. You can't see the chains, because they were made from good intentions. Expectations passed down like heirlooms. Be helpful, be humble, don't make a fuss, don't be too much. If you're angry, hide it. If you're tired, smile anyway. If someone crosses a line, fix it quietly. He didn't question those rules, he internalized them like gospel. And slowly, piece by piece, he bartered his authenticity for belonging. Because somewhere along the way, the lie was sold to him. If you stay agreeable, you'll be safe. What they didn't say is, safe is not the same as alive. He's mastered the art of being palatable, predictable, praiseworthy, but not once has he been real. When something hurts, he minimizes it. When something's unfair, he rationalizes it. When something enrages him, he turns it inward. There's a voice in him now that only speaks in whispers. It used to scream, but he learned to ignore it, buried it under spreadsheets, small talk, and showing up on time. But it's still there, and lately, it's getting louder. This isn't who you are. This isn't the life you want. This isn't freedom. And maybe, just maybe, he's starting to listen. But here's the catch. You don't get to break free without breaking rules. And when you've been taught that following the rules is what makes you good, rebellion starts to feel like a moral failure, like you're letting people down, like you're becoming someone dangerous. But what if the danger isn't in disobeying the rules? What if the danger is never questioning who wrote them? Because this isn't a story about some man in handcuffs. It's about the man sitting at his desk, replying on time, nodding through nonsense, and dying slowly, quietly, with a polite smile on his face. He doesn't wear chains. He wears expectation. And if he's going to escape, he needs to realize the prison was never locked. He just forgot he was in one. He didn't end up like this by accident. There was no big trauma, no dramatic betrayal, just a slow, systematic shaping of his identity by parents, teachers, managers, partners, all with smiles, all with good advice, all with invisible strings. It started early. When he sat still in school, he got a sticker. When he gave up his toy for his sibling, he got clapped. When he said, "Yes, sir," and "Thank you, miss," he got praised for being mature. When he cried, they said, "You're fine." When he questioned, they said, "Don't be difficult." When he got angry, they made him apologize. He learned quickly and quietly that approval was conditional, love was transactional, and to belong, he had to be smaller than his instincts. So he stopped asking for things, stopped saying how he really felt, stopped pushing back when something felt off, because in that system, obedience wasn't just expected, it was profitable. You want peace in the house? Be agreeable. You want attention from Dad? Be impressive. You want affection from Mum? Be useful. You want a job? Be what they want. You want to be chosen? Be less of a burden. This is how men become ghosts inside their own lives. They're not fighting some obvious tyrant. They're fighting the invisible contracts they signed as boys. Contracts that say, you'll be loved as long as you don't disrupt. But here's the sickness. The more he obeys those rules, the more he disappears. He becomes the man who listens but doesn't speak, the one who stays late but never asks for time off, the one who drives his friends around but never talks about how lonely he feels on the way home. And every time someone praises his patience, his reliability, his calmness, something in him dies a little more, because he knows it's not calm. It's suppression. It's not generosity. It's compulsion. It's not peace. It's paralysis. He has been trained to confuse being needed with being loved, and when he finally starts to feel the burnout, the bitterness, the boredom, he won't even know where to aim the blame. Because it's not just the people around him who taught him this. It's him now. He's the one enforcing the rules. That's how deep it goes. The cage isn't external. It's internalized. And if he's going to get out, he can't just fight the people who taught him these patterns. He has to fight the version of himself that believed them. The training was silent. The conditioning was praised. And the outcome? A man who spent his whole life earning what he never wanted and never asking for what he actually needs. It doesn't explode. It erodes. That's the nature of this kind of suffering. No dramatic collapse. Just the slow, invisible draining of a life never fully lived. On paper, he looks fine. Job, secure. Partner, not complaining. Calendar, full. But look deeper and you'll find the symptoms. He zones out in meetings. He dreads the group chat. He gives 10% in his relationship, but still feels resentful. He says yes to plans, then prays for them to get cancelled. He stays late at work so he can avoid the tension at home, then lies and says he's just busy. He loses hours scrolling through reels, not because they inspire him, but because the silence in his own life is too deafening. That's not laziness, that's disconnection. He's burnt out, but not from overworking. He's burnt out from over-censoring. He filters every word, he double-checks every instinct. He walks into a room and scans for who needs something from him and hands it over before they ask. This is not generosity, it's performance. A full-time emotional contortion act. And the longer it goes on, the more twisted the reward system becomes. He starts to believe that exhaustion is virtue, that guilt is just part of love, that tolerating disrespect is what makes you strong. And then comes the shame, the gnawing sense that even though he's doing everything right, something feels wrong. He starts to question himself. Maybe he's ungrateful. Maybe he's broken. Maybe this is just adulthood. Quiet desperation in a nice shirt. So he copes. He drinks a little more. He makes sarcastic jokes that aren't really jokes. He fantasizes about quitting everything and disappearing, but tells himself it's just a phase. It's not. It's his psyche sounding the alarm. This isn't a dip in energy. This is your soul preparing to abandon ship. And still, he stays. Not because he's weak, but because somewhere deep inside, he still believes leaving the performance would make him a bad man. That's the real tragedy. He doesn't fear failure. He fears being misunderstood. He doesn't fear loneliness. He fears becoming the villain in someone else's narrative. So he sacrifices. Again and again, until the sacrifice becomes so normal he can't even remember what he gave up in the first place. That's the cost. Not one massive blow, but 1,000 quiet ones, each one convincing him that freedom is selfish, that his truth is too disruptive, that his needs are optional. And so he survives, but he never thrives, because thriving requires audacity. And that's the one thing the training never gave him permission to have. Ethan never liked conflict, not because he couldn't handle it, he just thought it was unnecessary. In his world, smoothness meant strength. Silence meant control. He was the guy who'd drive everyone home after the pub, even when no one offered petrol money. He was the one who'd take on extra work when a colleague's child was sick. The one who kept his mouth shut at family dinners, even when the digs came his way. Let it go, he told himself. Be the bigger man. And so he did. For years. He showed up. He fixed things. He carried the weight no one else noticed was even there. And every time someone said, "Ethan, you're such a rock," he smiled, because that's who he decided to be. Until one day, he cracked. It wasn't a dramatic breakdown, no fists through walls, no drunken outbursts. Just an afternoon in a car park after work, hands on the steering wheel, engine off, heart pounding. A question rose up in his chest and refused to leave. If I died tonight, would anyone even know who I was? Because what people knew was the version he gave them, the safe version, the agreeable one, the Ethan who absorbed tension but never created any. But no one knew how much he hated being called easygoing. No one knew how much he resented being everyone's backup plan. No one knew that half his relationships were built on unspoken contracts. I'll keep performing if you keep approving. He thought he was being noble. Turns out he was being used, not maliciously, not with intent, but by design. The more he said yes, the more people stopped asking if he was okay. The more he kept the peace, the more invisible he became. And when he finally tried to set a boundary, just one small line in the sand, it triggered an earthquake. You've changed. Why are you being so difficult? What happened to the old Ethan? That's when it hit him. They hadn't loved him, they'd loved what he did for them. And as he sat there in that car, engine cold, face numb, he realized the truth. He hadn't been choosing kindness. He'd been choosing approval, because it felt safer than being alone. But the price, his identity, his needs, his voice. And now, he had two options. Keep performing and keep disappearing, or stop performing and let the chips fall where they may. That was the beginning of the real him, not the version they clapped for, not the version that kept everything running, but the one who was willing to say, "I'm not your peacekeeper. I'm not your emotional babysitter. I'm a man, and I've had enough." There's a moment where the exhaustion stops feeling like burnout and starts feeling like betrayal. Not by them, by you. Because eventually something breaks through the noise. A book, a sentence, a flash of disgust mid-conversation. Something shifts, and you realize it's not that you can't say no. It's that you've been trained not to. You've been groomed to feel guilt when you protect your energy, to feel shame when you disappoint other people's fantasies, to feel selfish when you prioritize your own needs. But that guilt, it's not moral, it's manufactured. You were programmed to survive in a system that only rewards you when you're small. And the moment you dare to expand, even slightly, it retaliates. You say no to a favor and suddenly you're unreliable. You express a need, and now you're too much. You draw a boundary and they call you aggressive. You stop performing and they say you've changed. Number, you didn't change. You woke up. You started noticing how many of your choices weren't really yours. You started recognizing the difference between peace and passivity. You started seeing how being the strong one was just code for never complain, never rest, never need. And it naffed you off, not in a way that made you want to scream, in a way that made you quietly, deliberately done. Done handing out comfort to people who weaponize it. Done holding space for conversations you weren't invited into. Done letting politeness silence truth. Because here's the thing, no one tells you. The people who benefit from your silence will always call your honesty a threat. And maybe you've started to realize being misunderstood is the cost of being real. That the love you lose when you stop performing was never love to begin with. It was leverage. That freedom isn't something they'll hand you with applause. It's something you take with intention. Quietly, sharply, permanently. And when that shift happens, when the mask starts to slip and the man underneath begins to stand, you don't feel lighter at first. You feel terrifyingly clear. It's not comfortable, it's not dramatic, it's not Instagrammable, but it's yours. And for the first time in your life, you don't need anyone else to approve of it. Alfred Adler believed that every human being comes into the world feeling small. He called it the inferiority complex. Not a flaw, but a fact. We're born helpless, dependent, vulnerable, and in response we develop strategies, ways to feel less powerless, more capable, more in control. Some people chase status, some chase perfection, some chase safety, but all of them are chasing significance. That's the engine behind every people pleaser, every workaholic, every man who's spent his life saying yes when he meant hell no. Because when you grow up feeling like who you are isn't quite enough, you don't correct it. You compensate. You make yourself useful. You make yourself agreeable. You make yourself invulnerable. And the world claps because they don't see the wound. They see the polish. Adler would call this a fictional final goal. A lie you build your life around. If I'm helpful enough, I'll be safe. If I'm good enough, I'll be loved. If I never complain, they'll never leave. These beliefs don't feel like lies. They feel like survival. But they are lies, and they cost you your truth. Because at the root of every over-functioning man is a fundamental error. He thinks he has to earn the right to exist. So he becomes indispensable, predictable, nice, and each time he's praised for it, the lie gets deeper. But here's what Adler knew, and what most never figure out. The need to prove yourself is the evidence that you've already lost yourself. The real goal isn't to be less inferior. It's to realize the inferiority was never true in the first place. You were never supposed to be obedient. You were supposed to be authentic. Not reckless, not arrogant, just honest and whole. But when you grow up in systems that punish truth and reward suppression, authenticity starts to feel dangerous. So you adapt, you perform, you forget, until one day you can't anymore. Because the performance no longer works. The body starts to protest, the soul starts to ache, the relationships feel hollow. And now the old strategy isn't just ineffective, it's unbearable. Adler said that healing doesn't come from fixing your flaws, it comes from choosing a new goal, not survival, not approval, not safety, but courage. The courage to live in alignment with your values, not your fear. That's when you shift from compensation to integration, from fictional safety to actual selfhood, from being liked to being real. And yes, it will cost you something. Adler never promised ease. He promised growth. Because freedom doesn't come from being good. It comes from knowing you were never unworthy in the first place. The shift isn't loud. There's no announcement. Just a series of quiet refusals. He gets the same email as usual. Can you just... Would you mind? Could you squeeze this in? But this time, he doesn't jump. He doesn't craft the perfect of course reply. He pauses, thinks, then types, "No, I won't be able to take that on." No excuse, no padding, no over-explaining. And just like that, the spell breaks. It's not a roar, it's a click. The door he thought was locked never had a key. He was just trained to knock. It happens again with a friend who always calls to offload, but never listens. He lets the phone ring out, no guilt, no callback. Then it's the family gathering where he's expected to play the buffer between two feuding relatives. He shows up late, leaves early, doesn't fill the gaps. Not in anger, not in protest, just not anymore. This is what it looks like when a man reclaims his autonomy. He speaks less but says more. He doesn't rush to fill silences. He lets people misunderstand him and doesn't panic. The moment he stops trying to be liked, he becomes respected. Because people can feel it. Something's shifted. He's not performing anymore. And sure, some don't like it. They call him selfish, cold, changed. But others, they lean in. Because his honesty makes space for their honesty. His boundaries make room for their bravery. His no gives permission for others to say yes to themselves. He's not trying to fix everything anymore. He's trying to live something true. He doesn't abandon kindness. He just stops offering it at his own expense. He doesn't lose compassion. He just stops performing it to earn connection. He doesn't reject love. He just stops settling for proximity, dressed up as loyalty. This is what self-respect looks like. It's not a slogan. It's a standard. He still shows up. He still cares. He still helps when he chooses to. But now, every yes is clean. Not bought by guilt. Not driven by fear. Just offered. Or not. And slowly, a new kind of man begins to emerge. Not angry, but aware. Not reckless, but real. Not agreeable, but alive. He doesn't walk around explaining himself anymore. He doesn't make a case for his needs. He doesn't soften the truth for people who refuse to meet it. He just lives. Director. Undiluted. Free. Not because the world changed, but because he did. He doesn't walk taller. He walks truer. There's no spotlight. no slow clap. No parade of people thanking him for finally choosing himself. The world doesn't reward men like this. It punishes them first. He loses things. A friendship that only worked when he overgave. A job where invisibility was currency. A relationship that fed off his guilt. It stings. It shakes him. But it doesn't stop him. Because once you taste truth, even a sip, you can't go back to swallowing lies just to keep the peace. He's no longer asking, what will they think? He's asking, what do I want to live with? That question changes everything. He doesn't fear being misunderstood anymore. He doesn't need everyone to agree. He doesn't play small to make others feel secure. He doesn't apologize for the volume of his truth, the size of his hunger, or the clarity of his no. And that makes him dangerous. Not to others. To the system that relied on his obedience. The man who knows he's free becomes unpredictable. Not chaotic, but ungovernable. He doesn't obey out of fear. He doesn't sacrifice to be seen. He doesn't perform to feel loved. He chooses what to give, what to withhold, what to walk away from, because he finally sees it. Freedom isn't found in being liked. It's found in being aligned. Aligned with your own values, your own voice, your own reality, even when it costs you comfort. And what rises in its place is a quiet kind of power, not the egoic kind, not domination, not noise, but something deeper. A man who no longer reacts. He responds. A man who isn't proving anything. He simply is. This is the becoming, not the final chapter. The first real one. The moment where the mask dissolves. The contract burns. And what's left isn't a perfect man, but an honest one. And that, finally, is enough.